Chapters 31 through 40 of Against Celsus, Book 3, by Origen. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Now if these things be so, why should it not be consistent with reason to hold with regard to Jesus, who was able to effect results so great that there dwelt in him no ordinary divinity? While this was not the case either with the Proconnetian Aristeas, although Apollo would have him regarded as a god, or with the other individuals enumerated by Celsus when he says, quote, "No one regards Abaris the Hyperborean as a god who was possessed of such power as to be borne along like an arrow from a bow," end quote. For with what object did the deity who bestowed upon this Hyperborean Abaris the power of being carried along like an arrow confer upon him such a gift? Was it that the human race might be benefited thereby, or did he himself obtain any advantage from the possession of such a power? Always supposing it to be conceded that these statements are not wholly inventions, but that the thing actually happened through the cooperation of some demon. But if it be recorded that my Jesus was received up into glory, I perceive the divine arrangement in such an act, viz., because God, who brought this to pass, commends in this way the teacher to those who witnessed it, in order that as men who are contending not for human doctrine, but for divine teaching, they may devote themselves so far as possible to the God who is over all, and may do all things in order to please him, as those who are to receive in the divine judgment the reward of the good or evil which they have wrought in this life. But as Celsus next mentions the case of the Clazomenian, subjoining to the story about him this remark, quote, "Do they not report that his soul frequently quitted his body, and flitted about in an incorporeal form, and yet men did not regard him as a god?" End quote. We have to answer that probably certain wicked demons contrived that such statements should be committed to writing, for I do not believe that they contrived that such a thing should actually take place, in order that the predictions regarding Jesus and the discourses uttered by him might either be evil spoken of as inventions like these, or might excite no surprise as not being more remarkable than other occurrences. But my Jesus said regarding his own soul, which was separated from the body, not by virtue of any human necessity, but by the miraculous power which was given him also for this purpose, quote, "No one taketh my life from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have the power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again." End quote. For as he had power to lay it down, he laid it down when he said, quote, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" And when he had cried with a loud voice, he gave up the ghost. End quote. Anticipating the public executioners of the crucified, who break the legs of the victims, and who do so in order that their punishment may not be further prolonged, and he, quote, "took his life," end quote, when he manifested himself to his disciples, having in their presence foretold to the unbelieving Jews, quote, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again," and "he spake this of the temple of his body," end quote. The prophets, moreover, having predicted such a result in many other passages of their writings, and in this, quote, "My flesh also shall rest in hope, for thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption," end quote. Celsus, however, shows that he has read a good many Grecian histories when he quotes further what is told of Cleomedes of Astypalaea, who, he relates, quote, "entered into an ark, and although shut up within it, was not found therein, but through some arrangement of the divinity flew out when certain persons had cut open the ark in order to apprehend him." End quote. Now this story, if an invention, as it appears to be, cannot be compared with what is related of Jesus, since in the lives of such men there is found no indication of their possessing the divinity which is ascribed to them, whereas the divinity of Jesus is established both by the existence of the churches of the saved, and by the prophecies uttered concerning him, and by the cures wrought in his name, and by the wisdom and knowledge which are in him, and the deeper truths which are discovered by those who know how to ascend from a simple faith, and to investigate the meaning which lies in the divine scriptures, agreeably to the injunctions of Jesus, who said, quote, "Search the scriptures," end quote, and to wish of Paul, who taught that, We ought to know how to answer every man, nay, also of him who said, Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh of you a reason of the faith that is in you. If he wishes to have it conceded, however, that it is not a fiction, let him show with what object this supernatural power made him, through some arrangement of the divinity, flee from the ark. For if he will adduce any reason worthy of consideration, and point out any purpose worthy of God in conferring such a power on Cleomedes, we will decide on the answer which we ought to give. But if he fail to say anything convincing on the point, clearly because no reason can be discovered, then we shall either speak slightingly of the story to those who have not accepted it, and charge it with being false, or we shall say that some demonic power, casting a glamour over the eyes, produced, in the case of the Asclepian, a result like that which is produced by performers of juggling tricks. While Celsus thinks that with respect to him he has spoken like an oracle when he said that, by some divine arrangement he flew away from the ark. I am, however, of the opinion that these individuals are the only instances with which Celsus was acquainted, and yet that he might appear voluntarily to pass by other similar cases, he says, and one might name many others of the same kind. Let it be granted, then, that many such persons have existed who conferred no benefit upon the human race. What would each one of their acts be found to amount to in comparison with the work of Jesus and the miracles related of him, of which we have already spoken at considerable length? He next imagines that, in worshipping him who, as he says, was taken prisoner and put to death, we are acting like the Getae, who worship Zamolxus, and the Cilicians, who worship Mopsus, and the Archanaeans, who pay divine honors to Amphilochus, and like the Thebans, who do the same to Amphiaraus, and the Labadians to Throfonius. Now in these instances we shall prove that he has compared us to the foregoing without good grounds. For these different tribes erected temples and statues to those individuals above enumerated, whereas we have refrained from offering to the divinity honor by any such means, seeing they are adapted rather to demons, which are somehow fixed in a certain place, which they prefer to any other, or which take up their dwelling, as it were, after being removed from one place to another by certain rites and incantations, and are lost in reverential wonder at Jesus, who has recalled our minds from all sensible things, as being not only corruptible, but destined to corruption, and elevated them to honor the God who is over all, with prayers and a righteous life, which we offer to him as being intermediate between the nature of the uncreated and that of all created things, and who bestows upon us benefits which come from the Father, and who, as high priest, conveys our prayers to the supreme God. But I should like, in answer to him, who for some unknown reason advances such statements as the above, to make in a conversational way some such remarks as the following, which seem not inappropriate to him. Are then those persons whom you have mentioned non-entities, and is there no power in Labadia connected with Trophonius, nor in Thebes with the temple of Amphiaraus, nor in Acarnania with Amphilochus, nor in Cilicia with Mophus? Or is there in such persons some being, either a demon, or a hero, or even a god, working works which are beyond the reach of man? For if he answer that there is nothing either demoniacal or divine about these individuals more than others, then let him at once make known his own opinion as being that of an Epicurean, and of one who does not hold the same views with the Greeks, and who neither recognizes demons nor worships gods as do the Greeks. And let it be shown that it was to no purpose that he adduced the instances previously enumerated, as if he believed them to be true, together with those which he adds in the following pages. But if he will assert that the persons spoken of are either demons or heroes or even gods, let him notice that he will establish by what he has admitted a result which he does not desire, viz., that Jesus also was some such being, for which reason, too, he was able to demonstrate to not a few that he had come down from God to visit the human race. And if he once admit this, see whether he will not be forced to confess that he is mightier than those individuals with whom he classed him, seeing none of the latter forbids the offering of honor to the others, while he, having confidence in himself, because he is more powerful than all those others, forbids them to be received as divine, because they are wicked demons who have taken possession of places on earth through inability to rise to the purer and diviner region, whither the grossness of earth and its countless evils cannot reach. But as he next introduces the case of the favorite of Adrian, I referred to the accounts regarding the youth Antinous, and the honors paid him by the inhabitants of the city of Antinous in Egypt, and imagines that the honor paid to him falls little short of that which we render to Jesus, let us show in what a spirit of hostility this statement is made. For what is there in common between a life lived among the favorites of Adrian by one who did not abstain even from unnatural lusts, and that of the venerable Jesus, against whom even they who brought countless other charges, and who told so many falsehoods, were not able to allege that he manifested, even in the slightest degree, any tendency to what was licentious? Nay, further, if one were to investigate in a spirit of truth and impartiality the stories relating to Antinous, he would find that it was due to the magical arts and rites of the Egyptians that there was even the appearance of his performing anything marvelous in the city which bears his name, and that too only after his decease, an effect which is said to have been produced in other temples by the Egyptians and those who are skilled in the arts which they practice. For they set up in certain places demons claiming prophetic or healing powers, and which frequently torture those who seem to have committed any mistake about ordinary kinds of food, or about touching the dead body of a man, that they may have the appearance of alarming the uneducated multitude. Of this nature is the being that is considered to be a god in Antinopolis in Egypt, whose reputed virtues are the lying inventions of some who live by the gain derived therefrom, while others, deceived by the demon placed there, and others again, convicted by a weak conscience, actually think that they are paying a divine penalty inflicted by Antinous. Of such a nature also are the mysteries which they perform and the seeming predictions which they utter. Far different from such are those of Jesus. For it was no company of sorcerers paying court to a king or ruler at his bidding, who seemed to have made him a god, but the architect of the universe himself, in keeping with the marvelously persuasive power of his words, commended him as worthy of honor, not only to those men who were well disposed, but to demons also, and other unseen powers, which even at the present time show that they either fear the name of Jesus as that of being of superior power, or reverentially accept him as their legal ruler. For if the commendation had not been given him by God, the demons would not have withdrawn from those whom they had assailed in obedience to the mere mention of his name. The Egyptians, then, having been taught to worship Antinous, will, if you compare him with Apollo or Zeus, endure such a comparison, Antinous being magnified in their estimation through being classed with these deities. For Celsus is clearly convicted of falsehood when he says, quote, that they will not endure his being compared with Apollo or Zeus, end quote. Whereas Christians, who have learned that their eternal life consists in knowing the only true God who is over all, and Jesus Christ, whom he has sent, and who have learned also that all the gods of the heathen are greedy demons, which flit around sacrifices and blood and other sacrificial accompaniments, in order to deceive those who have not taken refuge with the God who is over all, but that the divine and holy angels of God are of a different nature and will from all the demons on earth, and that they are known to those exceedingly few persons who have carefully and intelligently investigated these matters, will not endure a comparison to be made between them and Apollo or Zeus, or any being worshipped with odors and blood and sacrifices, some of them so acting from their extreme simplicity, not being able to give a reason for their conduct, but sincerely observing the precepts which they have received, others, again, for reasons not to be lightly regarded, nay, even of a profound description, and, as a Greek would say, drawn from the inner nature of things. And amongst the latter of these, God is a frequent subject of conversation, and those who are honored by God through his only begotten Word, with participation in his divinity, and therefore also in his name. They speak much, too, both regarding the angels of God and those who are opposed to the truth but have been deceived, and who, in consequence of being deceived, call them gods or angels of God, or good demons, or heroes who have become such by the transference into them of a good human soul. And such Christians will also show that as in philosophy there are many who appear to be in possession of the truth, who have yet either deceived themselves by plausible arguments, or by rashly assenting to what was brought forward and discovered by others, so also among those souls which exist apart from bodies, both angels and demons, there are some which have been induced by plausible reasons to declare themselves gods. And because it was impossible that the reasons of such things could be discovered by men with perfect exactness, it was deemed safe that no mortal should entrust himself to any being as to God, with the exception of Jesus Christ, who is, as it were, the ruler over all things, and who both beheld these weighty secrets and made them known to a few. The belief, then, in Antinous, or any other such person, whether among the Egyptians or the Greeks, is, so to speak, unfortunate, while the belief in Jesus would seem to be either a fortunate one, or the result of thorough investigation, having the appearance of the former to the multitude, and of the latter to exceedingly few. And when I speak of a certain belief being, as the multitude would call it, unfortunate, I in such a case refer the cause to God, who knows the reasons of the various fates allotted to each one who enters human life. The Greeks, moreover, will admit that even amongst those who are considered to be most largely endowed with wisdom, good fortune has had much to do, as in the choice of teachers of one kind rather than another, and in meeting with a better class of instructors, there being teachers who taught the most opposite doctrines, and in being brought up in better circumstances, for the bringing up of many has been amid surroundings of such a kind, that they were prevented from ever receiving any idea of better things, but constantly passed their life from their earliest youth, either as the favorites of licentious men or of tyrants, or in some other wretched condition which forbade the soul to look upwards. And the causes of these varied fortunes, according to all probability, are to be found in the reasons of Providence, though it is not easy for men to ascertain these. But I have said what I have done, by way of digression from the main body of my subject, on account of the proverb that, quote, such is the power of faith, because it seizes that which first presents itself, end quote. For it was necessary, owing to the different methods of education, to speak of the differences of belief among men, some of whom are more, others less fortunate in their belief, and from this to proceed to show that what is termed good or bad fortune would appear to contribute, even in the case of the most talented, to their appearing to be more fully endowed with reason, and to give their assent on grounds of reason to the majority of human opinions. But enough on these points. We must notice the remarks which Celsus next makes, when he says to us that, quote, faith, having taken possession of our minds, makes us yield the assent which we give to the doctrine of Jesus, end quote. For of a truth, It is faith which does produce such an assent. Observe, however, whether that faith does not of itself exhibit what is worthy of praise, seeing we entrust ourselves to the God who is over all, acknowledging our gratitude to him who has led us to such a faith, and declaring that he could not have attempted or accomplished such a result without the divine assistance. And we have confidence also in the intentions of the writers of the Gospels, observing their piety and conscientiousness manifested in their writings, which contain nothing that is spurious or deceptive or false or cunning. For it is evident to us that souls unacquainted with those artifices which are taught by the cunning sophistry of the Greeks, which is characterized by great plausibility and acuteness, and by the kind of rhetoric in vogue in the courts of justice, would not have been able thus to invent occurrences which are fitted of themselves to conduct to faith, and to a life in keeping with faith. And I am of opinion that it was on this account that Jesus wished to employ such persons as teachers of his doctrines, viz., that there might be no ground for any suspicion of plausible sophistry, but that it might clearly appear to all who were capable of understanding that the guileless purpose of the writers, being, so to speak, marked with great simplicity, was deemed worthy of being accompanied by a diviner power, which accomplished far more than it seemed possible could be accomplished by a periphrasis of words and a weaving of sentences, accompanied by all the distinctions of Grecian art. But observe whether the principles of our faith, harmonizing with the general ideas implanted in our minds at birth, do not produce a change upon those who listen candidly to its statements. For although a perverted view of things, with the aid of much instruction to the same effect, has been able to implant in the minds of the multitude the belief that images are gods, and that things made of gold and silver and ivory and stone are deserving of worship, yet common sense forbids the supposition that God is at all a piece of corruptible matter, or is honored when made to assume by men a form embodied in dead matter, fashioned according to some image or symbol of his appearance. And therefore we say at once of images that they are not gods, and of such creations of art that they are not to be compared with the Creator, but are small in contrast with the God who is over all, and who created and upholds and governs the universe. And the rational soul, recognizing, as it were, its relationship to the divine, at once rejects what it for a time supposed to be gods, and resumes its natural love for its Creator, and because of its affection towards him, receives him also who first presented these truths to all nations through the disciples whom he had appointed and whom he sent forth, furnished with divine power and authority to proclaim the doctrine regarding God and his kingdom. End of chapters 31 through 40 of Against Celsus, Book 3, by Origen. Read by David Ronald.